Tonight we delve into the silent earth, where echoes of forgotten souls stir beneath the soil. Prepare yourselves, for we are about to unearth tales from the very grounds where the living surrender their dead. Cemeteries. These aren't your typical ghost stories. These are accounts of unsettling encounters, chilling truths whispered by the earth itself, and the lingering dread that clings to those who dared to trespass on the sanctity of the grave. In today's episode, I'm sharing 3 true, disturbing stories about encounters within the hallowed grounds of cemeteries. You'll hear about a lonely groundskeeper who stumbled upon a hidden cult performing a ritual over a blindfolded woman, and a young man who, after a terrifying night in an abandoned graveyard, received a package containing a piece of his own uniform, a chilling warning from a group he never knew existed. So, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and ring that notification bell, because once these stories seep into your mind, they'll stay with you, long after the screen goes dark. Now, let's get into it. I've worked as a land surveyor for the past 15 years, a job that often takes me to the most remote and desolate corners of the country. I'm used to solitude, the quiet hum of nature my only companion. It was the summer of 2023 when I received a contract that seemed, at first, like any other, mapping an old disused cemetery on the outskirts of Blackwood Creek, a town so small it barely registered on most maps. The town itself had a population of less than 200, most of whom were descendants of the original settlers, and the cemetery was even older, dating back to the late 1800s. The pay was good, and I figured it would be a straightforward week of work. I just wanted quiet, real quiet, and a place where I wouldn't be bothered by the constant chatter of city life. I loaded up my old pickup truck, packed enough supplies for a week, and set off, eager for the peace of the countryside. My phone signal, as expected, faded about an hour before I reached Blackwood Creek, a common occurrence in such isolated areas. My GPS, however, started acting strangely, occasionally flickering between my actual location and a point miles away. I dismissed it as a minor glitch, something that often happened in areas with weak satellite coverage. As I approached Blackwood Creek, the gas tank on my truck was nearly empty. I spotted a dilapidated gas station that looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint since the 70s. An old woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, sat on a wooden chair outside, whittling a piece of wood. Her eyes, however, were sharp and unnerving. "Filling up for the cemetery," she croaked, her voice like dry leaves rustling. I nodded, a little taken aback. "I ain't taking you past here. Get out," she said, her gaze fixed on something beyond me, her eyes wide with a fear that seemed ancient. I tried to ask her what she meant, but she just shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. It was unnerving, to say the least. But I brushed it off as the eccentricity of an old recluse. The cemetery itself was exactly as described, overgrown and forgotten. The iron gates were rusted shut, and I had to cut away some thick brambles to get my truck through. The air was still heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. What struck me immediately was how strangely neat some parts of it were. Patches of graves, particularly those closer to the back, were meticulously cleared of weeds, the headstones almost sparkling clean. Despite the obvious age of the place, it was too perfect, too staged, in stark contrast to the wild disarray of the rest of the graveyard. The stillness was profound, almost suffocating. My equipment felt heavy in my hands, and an inexplicable shiver ran down my spine. Despite the warmth of the afternoon sun, the first day passed without incident, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I attributed it to the isolation and the old woman's unsettling warning. On the second day, as dusk began to settle, I started hearing whispers, faint and indistinct, carried on the gentle breeze. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, like the rustling of leaves, yet more deliberate, almost conversational. I dismissed them as the wind playing tricks, but the feeling of being observed intensified. Later that night, back in my tent, I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching on the gravel path outside. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. I shone my flashlight through the tent flap, but there was nothing, just the impenetrable darkness of the cemetery. The next morning, I found a series of deep, parallel scratches on the wooden railing of my truck bed, as if something with long, sharp claws had dragged itself across it. They were too deep to be animal scratches, and too deliberate. That night, I was woken by a metallic scraping sound coming from the old mausoleum at the far end of the cemetery. Peeking through my tent, I saw a fleeting reflection in the polished marble of a headstone, a tall, gaunt figure, cloaked in black, standing motionless. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving me breathless and cold. The true horror unveiled itself on the fourth night. I was woken by a low, guttural chanting emanating from deeper within the cemetery. Driven by a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress, I grabbed my flashlight and crept through the rows of tombstones, my heart pounding in my ears. The chanting grew louder, more rhythmic, and then I saw it, a clearing bathed in an eerie, flickering candlelight. A circle of cloaked figures stood around a raised stone slab, their faces obscured by deep hoods. On the slab lay a bound, blindfolded woman, her body unmoving. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a historical preservation society. This was a ritual, and the woman was clearly a sacrifice. The leader, a tall figure whose voice was a deep baritone, raised a glinting knife. Panic seized me. I dropped my flashlight with a clatter that echoed deafeningly in the still night. The chanting stopped abruptly. All heads snapped in my direction. There was no time to think, no time to scream. I turned and ran, blindly scrambling through the tangled undergrowth. The figures closed behind me, their heavy footsteps thudding on the soft earth. I didn't look back, not once, until I reached my truck, fumbled with the keys, and roared out of the cemetery, leaving the horrific scene behind. I drove until dawn, until the gas tank was nearly empty again, and I finally found a small diner, in a town that felt miles away from Blackwood Creek. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold my coffee cup. The next day, after finally getting some signal, I frantically searched online for anything about Blackwood Creek and its cemetery. What I found sent a fresh wave of dread through me. An old local news article, buried deep in an archive, detailed the disappearance of several young women from the Blackwood Creek area over the past few decades. The disappearances were always attributed to drifters or runaways, but one detail stood out. A recurring symbol found near the last known sighting of each woman, a carved symbol on a tree, resembling an inverted triangle with a circle at its apex. It was the same symbol I had seen etched into the oldest, cleanest headstones in the cemetery, hidden in plain sight. And then, there was a small, almost insignificant mention of an ancient local belief, passed down through generations, about a harvest of the unwilling that took place every few years, always tied to the cycles of the moon. The old woman's warning, the strangely clean graves, the figure in the mausoleum, it all clicked into place, a horrifying puzzle. The terror wasn't just in what I saw, but in the realization that it had been happening for years, shrouded in the silence of that forgotten cemetery. My name is David, and I've been a wildlife biologist for over a decade. My work usually involves long stretches of time in national parks or protected wilderness areas, tracking animal populations, studying migration patterns, and generally enjoying the quiet solitude of nature. It's a job that demands patience, meticulous observation, and a profound respect for the natural world. Last fall, I was assigned to a new project in the remote Cedar Creek Preserve, a vast expanse of forest bordering an ancient, unmarked cemetery that very few people even knew existed. My task was to monitor the local deer population, which meant setting up remote cameras and tracking their movements through the dense undergrowth. It was routine work, often boring, punctuated by the occasional excitement of spotting a rare bird or finding fresh tracks. The anomaly first presented itself on the third day. I was tracking a deer trail deep in the preserve, miles from any marked path, when I stumbled upon something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Lying on a bed of pine needles was a deer carcass, but it was unlike anything I had ever seen. The body was perfectly intact, with no signs of struggle or predation. However, its throat had been slit with surgical precision, a clean, almost artistic incision. There was very little blood, as if it had been drained. Around the carcass, neatly arranged, were small bundles of dried twigs tied with what looked like human hair. It was deeply unsettling, completely out of place in the wild. I took photos, noted the coordinates, and moved on, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. The next day I found another one, a rabbit this time, identical in its unnatural presentation. And then, a few days later, while checking one of my remote cameras, I found a strange symbol carved into the bark of a centuries-old oak tree, a series of interconnected triangles forming a complex, almost ritualistic pattern. It wasn't a trail marker, and it certainly wasn't natural. That the direct warning came swiftly and unnervingly. I returned to my camp one evening to find my tent flap slightly ajar. I always zipped it securely. Inside, my waterproof field journal, which I had left on my sleeping bag, was open to a blank page. On it, scrawled in a thick, dark substance that looked disturbingly like dried blood, was the same triangle symbol I had seen on the tree, and underneath it, a single, chilling word, observe. My heart hammered against my ribs. Someone had been in my camp, had watched me, and had left a message specifically for me. My GPS, which had been working intermittently, now showed my location fluctuating wildly, sometimes placing me hundreds of miles away. My satellite phone, usually reliable, had no signal at all. I was completely cut off. Despite the growing dread, a perverse sense of professional curiosity, coupled with the chilling directness of the warning, compelled me. I knew I shouldn't, but the biologist in me wanted to understand this anomaly. The next morning, following the direction indicated by the arrangement of the twig bundles near the animal carcasses, I cautiously tracked what appeared to be a faint, almost imperceptible game trail. It wasn't on any of my maps, and the undergrowth was thick, suggesting it was rarely used. After an hour of navigating the dense forest, the trees began to thin, and a clearing opened before me. In the center of the clearing stood a circular arrangement of rough, unhewn stones, hidden behind a thick cluster of ancient pines. I watched a group of figures, perhaps 20 or so, stood silently within the stone circle. They were dressed in dark, flowing robes, their faces obscured by deep hoods. They held no torches. The clearing was illuminated only by the pale moonlight filtering through the canopy. One figure, taller than the rest, stood in the center, slowly rotating a small, crudely carved wooden effigy in their hands. There was no chanting, no obvious ritual, just a profound, unsettling silence. Their stillness, their unified focus on the effigy, was far more terrifying than any scream or violent movement. It felt ancient, primordial, utterly wrong. My foot slipped on a patch of wet leaves, and a dry twig snapped loudly beneath my boot. The sound, in the overwhelming silence of the clearing, was deafening. Every hooded head in the circle snapped in my direction, a unified, swift movement that sent a jolt of pure terror through me. There was no shout, no immediate charge, just that unnerving, silent pivot. My blood ran cold. They knew I was there. I bolted, pure adrenaline coursing through my veins. The forest, once a comforting haven, became a labyrinth of shadows and grasping branches. I could hear them behind me, not running, but moving with an unnerving, deliberate pace. I heard soft rustling, the faint whisper of robes against leaves, always just behind me. The sounds seemed to come from all directions, disorienting me. I tripped, fell, scrambled to my feet, my lungs burning, the cold sweat of fear stinging. My eyes, I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. I finally burst out of the tree line onto a gravel road, not the one I had taken in, but any road. I didn't stop running until I saw the distant lights of a town. I never reported what I saw. Who would believe me? I left the Cedar Creek Preserve the next day, abandoning most of my equipment. The memory of those silent, turning heads haunted my nightmares. A week later, I found a small, unmarked cardboard box outside my apartment door. There was no return address. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried leaves, was a single, intricately tied stick bundle, identical to the ones I had seen next to the animal carcasses. In the center of the bundle was a scrap of dark blue fabric, neatly cut. It was from my ranger uniform, the small pocket where my name tag usually sat. The uniform I had left behind in my abandoned tent. They knew who I was, they knew where I lived. The threat wasn't over, it was just beginning. I work as a night watchman for a small, independent security company, primarily overseeing vacant commercial properties and construction sites during the graveyard shift. It's a solitary existence, often uneventful, filled with the hum of fluorescent lights and the quiet creak of old buildings settling. The most exciting part of my job usually involves chasing away teenagers or reporting a broken window. So, when I was assigned a temporary contract to patrol the grounds of the old St. Augustine's Cemetery, I didn't think much of it. Town council had recently received complaints of vandalism and petty theft, and they wanted a visible presence. It was an old, sprawling cemetery, dating back to the late 1700s, with crumbling mausoleums and tilting headstones. My routine was simple: drive the perimeter, walk the main paths, and check the gates every few hours. I just wanted quiet, real quiet, and a place where I wouldn't be bothered by the constant chatter of city life. The area was known for its spotty cell service, and as soon as I entered the older sections of the cemetery, my phone consistently showed no service. My GPS, for some reason, kept showing my location slightly off, as if I was always a few feet to the left or right of the actual path. It was a minor annoyance, easily dismissed. The first hint of something truly amiss came on my third night, as I drove my beat-up security vehicle along a barely visible access road at the very back of the cemetery. My headlights illuminated a small makeshift tent tucked away amongst a cluster of ancient gnarled oak trees. It was the kind of cheap camping tent you'd buy at a discount store, completely out of place in a centuries-old cemetery. I approached cautiously, flashlight in hand, fully expecting to find teenagers or homeless individuals. But there was no one. The tent flap was open, revealing a neatly folded sleeping bag, an empty water bottle, and a small, worn, leather-bound book. The book was open to a page filled with strange, handwritten script and elaborate, unsettling drawings that looked like anatomical diagrams mixed with occult symbols. A chill ran down my spine. I left it undisturbed, noted its presence, and continued my patrol. A lingering sense of unease settling over me. The direct warning arrived 2 nights later. I was making my rounds near the main entrance when I noticed my patrol vehicle's passenger side window was slightly ajar, even though I distinctly remembered rolling it all the way up. Inside, on the driver's seat, was a small, tightly folded piece of paper. My company-issued flashlight, which I had left on the dashboard, was gone. On the paper, written in the same unsettling script from the book, was a single word: watch. It wasn't a question, but a command, direct and chilling. It meant someone had not only been in my vehicle, but had also taken my primary source of light, leaving me with only my unreliable phone flashlight. The message was personal, a clear indication that I was no longer just an observer, but observed. Driven by a strange mix of professional responsibility and burgeoning fear, I returned to the location of the tent. It was gone. The ground where it had stood was disturbed, but carefully so, as if someone had meticulously removed all traces of their presence. However, as I scanned the surrounding area, I noticed a faint, almost invisible trail leading deeper into the woods that bordered the cemetery's far boundary. It wasn't a deer trail. It was too narrow, too deliberate, and too well hidden. It was almost midnight, and the moon was just a sliver, casting long, shifting shadows. A low rhythmic hum, almost imperceptible at first, drifted from the direction of the trail. It sounded like a deep collective sigh, or perhaps a chant. Curiosity, or perhaps a foolish sense of duty, compelled me to follow. The hum grew louder, more distinct, until I recognized it as a series of low, guttural vocalizations. I moved slowly, carefully, pushing aside branches, until I reached a small, natural amphitheater, a depression in the earth hidden by a dense ring of trees. What I witnessed froze me to the bone. Perhaps a dozen figures, cloaked in black, stood in a tight circle around a freshly dug grave. The earth around the grave was disturbed, but oddly, there was no mound of excavated dirt. In the center of the grave, illuminated by the faint glow of what appeared to be phosphorescent moss clinging to the roots of the surrounding trees, lay a form. It was human-shaped, but strangely elongated, its limbs contorted at unnatural angles. The figures around it were swaying, a low collective moan emanating from them, their hoods obscuring their faces entirely. One figure, taller than the rest, held a long bone-white implement, slowly, methodically, pressing it into various points on the prone form. There was no blood, no struggle, just the horrifying, silent operation. It was clear this was no ordinary burial. It was something far more ancient and sinister. My breath hitched in my throat. A dry leaf, caught in a sudden, tiny gust of wind, skittered across the ground near my hiding spot, its rustle amplified in the chilling silence. Every hooded head in the circle snapped up, turning in unison towards my location. There was no mistaking it this time. I had been discovered. Pure, unadulterated terror seized me. I didn't think, I just reacted. I scrambled back, tearing through the undergrowth, the distinct sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps following closely behind. They weren't running, they were moving with an unnerving, relentless pace, their sounds echoing through the darkened woods. I heard the snapping of twigs, the rustle of robes, always just a few yards behind me. My heart was a drum in my chest, my lungs burned, and the taste of adrenaline was bitter in my mouth. I burst out of the tree line and onto the main path, blindly sprinting towards my vehicle, fumbling with the keys, the engine roaring to life as I threw it into reverse and sped out of the cemetery gates. I drove for hours, not stopping until the sun was well above the horizon. I never went back to that cemetery. I quit my job that week, citing personal reasons. The memory of what I saw, the silent, unnatural ritual, and the relentless pursuit, burrowed deep into my mind. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion and the isolation of the night shift. But then, 2 weeks later, as I was packing my belongings to move to a new city, I found a small, neatly folded piece of white fabric tucked into the bottom of my laundry basket, a basket I had emptied days ago. It was a strip of cloth, no bigger than my thumb, and on it, stitched in fine dark thread, was the same strange, unsettling symbol from the book and the warning note. They knew where I was. They still knew. The silence of the night no longer feels like peace. It feels like a patient, lingering presence. As we close this chapter on the unsettling, remember that the true horrors often lie not in the supernatural, but in the depths of human darkness and the secrets that burial grounds silently keep. If these stories chilled you to the bone, leave a comment below sharing your own experiences or fears. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Dr. Bonechill for more true scary stories that will linger long after the screen goes dark. Until our next descent into the shadows, stay safe, and remember to always watch your step in the quiet places. I never reported what I saw. Who would believe me? I left the Cedar Creek Preserve the next day, abandoning most of my equipment. The memory of those silent turning heads haunted my nightmares. A week later I found a small, unmarked cardboard box outside my apartment door. There was no return address. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried leaves, was a single, intricately tied stick bundle, identical to the ones I had seen next to the animal carcasses. In the center of the bundle was a scrap of dark blue fabric, neatly cut. It was from my ranger uniform, the small pocket where my name tag usually sat. The uniform I had left behind in my abandoned tent. They knew who I was. They knew where I lived. The threat wasn't over. It was just beginning.